She was standing under the awning of the hardware store on Birch Avenue with 2 paper bags, getting soft at the handles from the wet and no umbrella, and the particular expression of someone who has decided to wait out a rain that is not going to stop. I almost didn't stop. The light was green. I had somewhere to be. And then I saw who it was, and pulled over anyway, because there are some people you don't drive past in the rain regardless of the history, and Eleanor Park was one of them. She got in. She said, "Daniel." She said it the way she always said my name, like it was a word she was glad existed. I said, "Where are you headed?" She said, "Home." She said, "I've been trying to get a cab for 20 minutes. I said, "I'll take you." We drove. The rain came down the way it does in October. Seriously, like it meant it. And she told me about the hardware store and a drawer that wouldn't close, and a solution she'd found online that required a specific kind of sandpaper. She asked about my work. I asked about her garden. 14 minutes of the ordinary conversation we had always been able to have without effort, the way some people make conversation and some people simply talk, and Eleanor had always been the second kind. I pulled into her driveway. She gathered the bags. She opened the door, and then she paused with one foot on the wet pavement, and she looked at me and she said, "I've missed having you around." She said it quietly. She said it the way people say things that are true, and have been for a while, and have finally found the right moment to say. She went inside. I sat in the driveway for a moment with the rain on the windscreen and thought about the fact that Eleanor Park had just said what I had not known I was waiting to hear. My name is Daniel Yoon. I'm 33. I work in landscape photography. I take images of places at the hour of day when the light is doing something true, which is a romantic way of describing a job that involves a lot of early mornings and moderate amounts of mud. I live in an apartment on the north side of a city I've been in for 6 years. I have been single for 14 months, since the end of a relationship that lasted 3 years and ended, as some 3-year things do, not with catastrophe, but with the slow understanding that 2 people have grown in different directions, and the overlap that used to feel like everything has become something smaller. Her name had been Claire Park. She was 31. She was now living in Vancouver, and from what I understood from the small occasional updates that reach you whether you seek them out or not, was doing well. We had ended kindly. That is not always possible, and I was grateful it had been. What I had not expected to lose, alongside Claire, was her mother. Eleanor Park was 62. She had worked as a librarian for 30 years and had the particular quality of someone who has spent decades in the presence of stories. A patience with complexity, a curiosity that didn't rush its subjects, a way of making you feel that what you said was worth the attention she gave it. She had a garden in the back of the house on Sycamore Street that she had been tending for 20 years, and which she discussed with the specificity of someone describing old friends. She made tea the way other people made arguments, deliberately, with a point of view. She had a reading chair by the window with a lamp angled just so and a stack beside it that she rotated every 2 weeks. And I knew this because I had sat across from that chair many times and had found it one of the more restful places I had occupied. She had a way of asking a question that was different from how most people asked questions. Most people ask and then wait to reply. She asked and then waited to actually hear. There is a difference, and it shapes a conversation entirely. I had been in the habit for 3 years of saying more in that kitchen than I said anywhere else, which I had attributed to the tea and the light and the general atmosphere of the house, and which I now understood was primarily Eleanor. She had given me, over 3 years, the consistent experience of being listened to, and I had not known until it was gone how much I had been building on that foundation. She had been, for 3 years, one of the people I most looked forward to seeing. I had not known how to name that while Claire and I were together, because it existed in the category of things that seemed so natural they didn't require examination. You dated someone. You liked their family. The family became part of the texture of your life. Then, the relationship ended, and the texture went with it, and you understood. In the absence, that you had not been adequately accounting for what you would miss. I had been grieving Eleanor Park quietly for 14 months. I had not had language for it until she said what she said in the driveway. There were specific things I had missed. Not in a general, atmospheric way. Specifically, I had missed the way she asked about my work, which was never small talk disguised as interest, but actual curiosity about how photography worked at the level of decision-making. Why this light? Why this angle? What were you looking for when you found that? I had been in the habit, for 3 years, of showing her photographs before I showed them to anyone else, because she looked at them the way she read, slowly, from the thing itself, without the distortion of trying to say something smart about them. She would look for a long time and then say what she actually thought, which was always specific and sometimes uncomfortable and always worth having. I had missed the Saturday morning light through her back kitchen window, which came in at an angle between 9 and 10 that I had tried to find in my own apartment and could not replicate. I had photographed it 11 times in 3 years and never once shown those photographs professionally because they felt like they belonged to the house. I had missed the tea. Not the tea itself, I could make tea, but the way she made it, which was the way she did most things, without rushing, with a point of view. There was a process, and she followed it, and the result was always better than the effort appeared to cost. I had missed being in a room where I was listened to at the level Eleanor Park listened. This is not a small thing. Most people hear you. She attended. There is a difference, and you understand it fully only when you have been in the presence of both. I had gone 14 months not knowing I was hungry for it. The way you don't identify a specific hunger until someone puts the right thing in front of you. I had not told any of this to anyone. I had not had the right words for it. It existed in the territory between grief and gratitude that doesn't have a clean name. I had filed it under the cost of ending things, which is real but is not the whole account. I texted her that evening. I said, "I'm glad I saw you." She replied within a few minutes. She was a prompt texter for someone of her generation, which I had always found both characteristic and endearing. And she said, "Come for tea sometime." She said it like an open invitation, and I accepted it like one. I went the following Saturday. The house on Sycamore Street was the same. The garden was doing its October things, mostly dormant, but organized, put to bed with the specific care of someone who was already planning spring. The kitchen smelled the same, old wood and whatever she'd been baking, and the faint cedar of the drawer liners she'd replaced 2 winters ago because the old ones had gotten soft. These were things I had not expected to remember and found, walking through the door she held open, that I had kept without knowing. She made the tea with the same deliberateness I remembered. We sat in the kitchen, not the living room, which meant we were talking rather than visiting, and she told me about her sister's recent move and a book she'd read that she couldn't stop recommending, and a problem with the garden fence that she'd been putting off addressing, because the solution required scaffolding, and scaffolding required a decision. I said, I could help with the fence. I said it before I thought about whether I should, which was, I would later understand, accurate information about how I felt about Eleanor Park and the house on Sycamore Street. She looked at me. She said, "You don't have to do that." I said, "I know." She said, "You've been very careful about this, haven't you? About what's appropriate." I said, I wasn't sure it was my place anymore. She looked at her tea for a moment. Then she said, "Daniel, I watched you take photographs of my garden for 3 years. I've seen you sit in this kitchen at 7 in the morning before a shoot, because you said the light was better from the back window. I know what you bring to a tea and what you bring to a conversation, and I know the way you listen, which is the way not many people listen, and you have been part of this house in a way that has nothing to do with Claire and everything to do with you. I said nothing for a moment. Something in my chest settled, the particular relief of a thing you've been carrying alone being acknowledged by another person. She said, "I'm not saying anything complicated. I'm saying I've missed you." That's allowed, isn't it? I said, "Yes, I've missed this too." She said, "Good." She said, "There are 2 cups for a reason." I looked at the 2 cups on the counter. She had set them out before I arrived. I understood what that meant, not that she had planned anything, but that she had hoped, and had prepared for the hope, which is its own kind of courage. We fixed the fence the following weekend. I brought the equipment and she directed operations from the garden with a cup of tea and opinions about angle. It took most of the morning. At one point I asked her advice on a section that was worse than the others, and she came to look and assessed it the way she assessed most things, from all sides, without rushing a conclusion. She said, "Take it back to the post and start fresh." I said, "That's more work." She said, "The patched version will only hold for a season." I thought about that for the rest of the morning. She fed me lunch afterward, the kind of lunch that happens when someone has been cooking for decades and does it the way Eleanor did everything, attentively, without fuss, the result better than its components suggested. Over the soup she said, "How are you, really? Not the photograph version." I said, "Better than I was 6 months ago." She said, "I wondered." I said, "You could have texted." She said, "I didn't know if that was my place." I said, "It is." We sat with that for a moment. She said, "All right then. Now we both know." In the weeks that followed, I came back. Not every week, not on a schedule, but often enough that the visits had a pattern without being an obligation. I photographed the garden in November, in December, through the flat gray light of midwinter when everything is stripped to its structure and the bones of a garden show. She made tea while I worked and asked questions afterward about what I was looking for and what I found. She told me about the books she was reading. I told her about the projects I was working on. The kitchen on Saturday mornings became a place I looked forward to the way I looked forward to the good light hours, with the knowledge that something true was available there. There was a Saturday in December when I arrived, and she was already in the garden despite the cold, checking on something at the base of the rose that had been worrying her. She had a particular expression she used when she was assessing a plant, slightly narrowed, tilted. The same expression she used for books she wasn't sure about yet. I stood at the kitchen window with my tea and watched her work and thought, I have been looking for this quality of attention in every room I have photographed for 6 years, and it has been in this garden the whole time. I did not say this out loud, but I stopped telling myself the visits were a kindness to her, and understood they were also a necessity for me. Her daughter called from Vancouver on a Tuesday in January. Eleanor told me about the call 2 days later over tea, not with orchestration, just as part of the ordinary exchange of what was happening. She said Claire had asked about me. She said she had told her I'd been helping with the garden and the fence. She said Claire had said I'm glad. She said it sounded like she meant it. I said, how is she? Eleanor said, happy, I think. Really different kind of happy from what she was here, but genuine. I said, good. That's genuinely good. Eleanor looked at me with the patient attention she gave to things she was reading carefully. She said, you're allowed to mean that and also to be glad you're here and she's there. I said, I know. She said, I just want to make sure you know I know. I said, I know that too. She smiled, the small, warm, specific one that I had missed for 14 months and had not known how to say I'd missed. She refilled my cup without asking. Outside the garden was doing its January things, bare and organized and already quietly planning. The way she had taught me gardens worked, not dormant, just patient. It was not a love story in the way most love stories are told. It was something more particular than that. The recovery of a belonging that had been mislaid, a relationship that had existed in the shadow of another and turned out to have its own substance entirely. Eleanor Park was not a substitute for anything. She was herself, a woman who made tea deliberately and listened attentively, and had a garden she tended with the care of someone who understood that growing things require patience and the right conditions and the decision, repeated every season, to try again. I came to understand over those winter months that I had been photographing light for 6 years because I was interested in the moment when something reveals itself, the hour when a landscape stops being background and becomes the thing itself. Eleanor Park had been part of my landscape for 3 years without me understanding that she was also the thing itself. The rain on Birch Avenue and the soft paper bags and the 14 minutes of easy conversation had simply been the hour when the light was right. There is a photograph I took that February of the garden through the kitchen window. The morning light comes in at the angle I had missed for 14 months. Long and specific, falling across the table where the 2 cups sit. Eleanor is in the garden, slightly out of focus, looking at the rose. The photograph has been in my portfolio for 2 years now, and people ask about it regularly. What was the place? What was the light? How did you find it? I say I'd been there before, I just hadn't been back in a while. 2 years after the driveway, she asked me once what I thought I would do, long term, where I saw things going. She asked it the way she asked everything, without agenda, just curious. I said I didn't know exactly. I said I knew what I wanted to be close to. She said, "What's that?" I said, "Places where things grow." She looked at the garden and then at me and said, "Yes, I thought so." The garden comes back every spring. She is always ready for it. I am always there when the first light of the season comes through the back window at the angle that makes the whole thing visible. And I take the photograph, and she makes the tea, and neither of us remarks on how long this has been true. Because it doesn't need remarking on. It simply is. What would you have done if someone you'd lost in a breakup, not the person, but someone around them, told you they'd missed having you around? And have you ever understood only in the absence of something that you had not been accounting for what it was worth to you? Tell me in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.